Okay, hi everybody. We're going to get started now. So welcome to Open House. It's the financial aid session. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen so you guys can see the presentation. Okay. Okay, so my name is Andrea Kwong and I'm here with Ray Loftus. So Ray, do you want to wave so they know who you are? And we're financial aid counselors here at SCU. And this is just a quick agenda of what we're going to be talking about today. We're just going to talk about what financial aid is, different types of financial aid, what the financial aid process looks like, some key deadlines to keep in mind, and we'll leave time for some Q&A. But if you have any questions that you think of along the way, you can go ahead and type them in the chat box and we'll go ahead and look at that at the end as well. I'm going to go ahead and pass it over to Ray, who's going to talk about what financial aid is.
Hello, everybody. Thanks for joining us. So like Andrea said, we're just going to do a quick overview of the financial aid process. And one thing that we have learned in our years in financial aid are two things. Actually, there's two things that we've learned. One is that most questions that people are going to have are going to be very, very specific to them and their situation, and that's okay. And then the other thing is that our answer is almost always, it depends. So if you ask us a question and then we say, well, it depends, and then there's 3 or 4 different scenarios, that's just kind of the way financial aid works. So we're going to go ahead and get started then, and we'll go to the first slide. So the overview of the types of financial aid that are available. Financial aid is money for educational expenses for college, which do include grants, which are federal and state, institutional scholarships. For Santa Clara, that's usually an SCU need-based grant or an SCU merit scholarship. Then there's federal work study, loans, federal loans for both the parents and the student. There's also private loans, and then there are private scholarships. Now, we're going to talk a little bit about ways to apply for these, what they mean, and how you can be eligible for them. So we're going to go into this a little bit later with the different types of applications that you would use, but you guys by now probably have heard of the Fafsa. So you would use the Fafsa to apply for the state and federal grants and federal work study, and also the federal loans. If you don't do a Fafsa, you can still be considered for institutional scholarships, merit, or you wouldn't get a need-based, because if we don't have your Fafsa, we wouldn't know what kind of need you had, but you could still be considered for merit scholarships, and you can always take out private loans. You can always get private scholarships even without a Fafsa. So next slide. The Branson Scholarships, these are awarded on the basis of financial need, or a service you've performed, or a talent that you have, or merit that you possess. And anything that's a grant or a scholarship or a fellowship, those are not going to need to be paid back. So there's 3 types of grants. It's federal, which would be like the Pell Grant, state, which would be like the Cal Grant or the California Dream Act, and then institutional, which would be like the SCU need-based grant we talked about earlier. There's another federal grant called the Federal Supplemental Education Opportunity Grant, and we call it FSEOG. And then the Santa Clara grants, they're not strictly limited to the incentive grant or the need-based grant. Sometimes they'll have a different name, but that's really more once you're in Santa Clara and you have an award, we'll kind of explain a little bit more about those types of names. Okay. Federal work study. So federal work study is something a lot of people kind of know about going into the financial aid process, but it's a little bit different from other types of financial aid. You do not need to pay it back because it's money that you would earn. It's a need-based award. It's a federally funded award, and it is need-based, so you would have to complete a Fafsa. And then what you would get is on your financial aid letter or your shopping sheet, it would say that you've been offered a certain amount. We start with around $2,500 at Santa Clara, but different schools can use different amounts. And then that award is on your financial aid award. It's offered to you, and you would need to accept it. These these federal work study program monies can be earned when you're doing an on-campus job that is federal work study eligible. All on-campus jobs are federal work study eligible. And the way you receive these funds would be in the form of your paycheck that's paid to you like regularly with your paycheck by your employer. So even if your financial aid award says you're getting, for example, $2,500 in federal work study funds, once you have earned $2,500, that just means that the federal work study funds set aside for you dried up, and you can continue to be paid, but the funds would come 100% out of your employer's budget, and the funds aren't any longer being subsidized by the government. So it's that your employer has gone through your funds and they can keep you on or not. But that's why the more work study funds you have, the more likely it is for an employer to hire you, because they'll want to be able to utilize those federal work study funds for your paycheck so that they're not paying all of their costs for employment out of their own budget. So the best benefits to that, it doesn't, like I said, it does not come off of your bill, and you would get the funds in your paycheck. So the best benefit to that is that it makes you a little bit more hireable, because some jobs only want students who are eligible for federal work study. And it also makes you a little bit more employable once you do have a job. We can increase that amount, but that's something that we kind of do more of on a case-by-case basis as the year goes on. Okay, next slide. Student loans. So the federal government has two types of student loans that are available. All you have to do to be eligible for these is complete a Fafsa. If you are an eligible student, meaning that you are pursuing a college degree, an undergraduate college degree, and you are enrolled in school at least half time. So you have to be enrolled at least half time. You're eligible. It's okay. You're eligible to get these loans. They're going to be offered to you automatically. You do not have to it's no credit report is run for you. It's just if you've completed a valid FAFSA and you're an eligible student, you can get up to, as an incoming freshman, you can get up to $5,500 in federal student loans. If you have financial need, then you would also be eligible. Well, not also. Part of those loans can be eligible for the subsidized loan. A subsidized loan is need-based. So you would have to demonstrate that you have need based on your FAFSA. And you would be able to have a loan that does not accrue interest while you're enrolled in school. That's basically the only difference between the subsidized and the unsubsidized loan. The maximum amount for eligibility for an incoming first-year student with the subsidized loan is $3,500. So you can get up to $3,500 of your annual limit of $5,500 in the subsidized loan if you have enough federal need. So, but the payment period is the same. Everything else is the same. So for student loans, both of them, you do not have to make payments. Payments are deferred until after you're no longer enrolled in school. Then there's a 6-month grace period. Then your repayment period would begin. But you would have to apply every year with the FAFSA in order to be eligible for the next year. So go ahead with the next slide. Then the Parent Plus loan. This is a loan parents can take out for the benefit of their students. And again, you would have to complete a valid FAFSA. So you would have to be a dependent student, and your parents' information would be on the FAFSA. Now, because you have a valid FAFSA, your parents are eligible to apply for the federal Parent Plus loan, but it is not an automatic like it is for your student loan. They would have to apply and they would have a credit check run. So you would again have to be enrolled at least half time to be an eligible student. But then the thing about a plus loan is that the parents can borrow as much as they feel like they might need to, up to the total cost of attendance for the year in the Parent Plus loan. They don't have to borrow the full amount, but they can borrow. So it gives a little bit more flexibility for people who aren't sure of other ways to maybe be able to bridge the gap between what financial aid is offering to a student and what the parents feel like they can afford to pay. There is interest on these and origination fees. It does change every year, and they would have to apply. You would have to complete a FAFSA every year that you wanted a loan. but the amounts can change. So it can be one that you can work with. They can borrow as little as, if they only need, $500 per quarter to borrow, then that's all they have to borrow, or they can borrow as much as your total cost of attendance if they need to. Okay. So some people can't or do not wish to complete a FAFSA, or maybe, for example, if your parents have a small business, they've got a really good relationship with their own bank, and they have very comparable products, loan products to the federal government. And so they may want to look at an alternative or a private loan. This can be with any lender that offers private educational loans, but you would have to do the research on your own, and your parents would have to get that loan on their own. So they would apply directly through the lender. And then once they were approved, the loan information would be sent by the lender to Santa Clara University, and we would review it for certification. And then the funds would get dispersed into your student account, just like a regular, any other financial aid would go through. But private and alternative loans, Santa Clara University, we don't have a preferred lender. We don't have information on preferred lenders. It would completely be your own research. And those are not backed by the federal government. But that being said, some of them can have pretty good rates, but you would want to do your own research and decide which one would be better for you. So the last thing that you can do, well, not the last thing, but one of the other things that you can do to help bridge the gap between the financial aid that you're offered and what you can afford to pay would be to apply for private or outside scholarships. Now, this does involve some work on your part, and you're busy enough as it is, but the way to look at it is that even if a scholarship that you're applying for is only $500 or $600, if it takes you an hour to write an essay about why you want to be a political science major, and then maybe potentially win that scholarship, I mean, that's pretty good hourly rate of $600 for writing that essay. So private scholarships, I have seen students fund more than half of their tuition on scholarships. They can be incredibly helpful, and they add up too. You do 2 or 3 scholarships for $1,000, and you've definitely made a dent in your tuition and your cost of attendance. So it's definitely worth taking a look at. But one thing to be very careful about when you are applying for these scholarships is you want to watch out for anything that could be fraudulent. There are scams out there. You should never, ever have to provide financial information, especially not up front. At some point, if you do win the scholarship, they may need to know where to send a check to, and you can give them Santa Clara's, the school of your choice's address. But no, any scholarship that's asking you for too much information about your own personal finances is probably one you want to be careful of. This is a list of scholarship search engines that we have found to be reputable and reliable, and that these are definitely ones that would be more worth your time to take a look at. Okay. So now I'm going to turn it over to Andrea, and she's going to talk to you more about the financial aid process. And then afterwards, we will have time for some questions. All right. Thank you guys so much.
Okay, so going to be talking about what you guys will be doing. So the first thing you'll want to fill out when applying to SCU is the Css Profile, which is through the College Board. And then, as many of you probably know, is the Fafsa, is the free application for federal student aid. And if you're a California resident or high school graduate, you would want to complete the CalGrant GPA verification form, which you could do online at this website. And then, so first, the Css Profile. So this is an application that's used only by some institutions in order to determine your family's need for institutional financial aid. So this would be SCU grants and scholarships. And this is a supplemental aid application to the FAFSA. So you would want to do it in addition to the FAFSA, not in lieu of. And the last time we checked, it's $25 per application for the first college you select to send it to, and $16 for any additional college you decide to fill it out for. And you will want to check the school that you're applying for, because each school has different requirements for the CSS profile. So for example, for us here at SU, we only require it for our first year students. So you only need to fill it out when you're applying your freshman year. You don't need to do it again your sophomore, junior, and senior year like you would do for your Fafsa. So this is only, CSS is only for our first year at SU. We don't require non-custodial parent information or waivers or tax records of any sort to go with the profile. And your Fafsa, so you and your parent will fill out the Fafsa, and once it's complete, the Fafsa will give you a number, which is called the expected family contribution. And that's calculated using all of the things you see here listed. So your income, your assets, your savings, number of people in your family that are attending college, and other mandatory living expenses, things like that. Something to keep in mind is that the expected family contribution is defined as the amount that student and parent are reasonably expected to contribute towards students' education. But this number is not the amount that the family is going to pay, nor is it the amount of aid that you're going to receive. It's more just a number that's calculated by Fafsa that us as financial aid counselors use to determine your federal aid eligibility. So kind of like when Ray was talking about your sub loan and your unsub loan, we use this expected family contribution number to determine which loan that you're eligible for based on your cost of attendance. And so the Fafsa, let's say you're applying for next fall, it opened on October 1st, so you can already start and fill that out now. And keep in mind that it does use prior year tax information. So for example, if you're applying for next fall, it would be using your parents' 2019 income information. And so these are some of the key deadlines that you're going to want to keep in mind depending on what your admission track you're applying for is. So for early action and early decision 1, you'll want to fill out the CSS profile by November 15th, the FAFSA by February 1st, and the Cal Grant or DREAM Act application by March 2nd. If you're planning on applying regular decision or early decision, the CSS profile should be done by January 15th, the FAFSA by February 1st, and the Cal Grant or DREAM Act application by March 2nd. And all of these deadlines are also on our website too. And so if you find that you need any help filling out your FAFSA or your CSS profile, there's something called Cash for College, which is there's free workshops pretty much all around California, I believe, that you and your family can attend. And there's just volunteers there to help you fill out your CSS and your FAFSA right there on the spot. So you can go to this link right here and it'll show you all of the upcoming workshops near you if you're interested. And lastly, we do understand that there are special circumstances that come up since the FAFSA uses prior year information, and that might not reflect what your parents' income situation looks like right now. Especially, we've seen an increase in appeals because a lot of people are losing their jobs due to COVID, and that counts as one of the special circumstances which you can file an appeal for. So examples of special circumstances include a loss of income, extensive medical bills that aren't covered by medical insurance, the death of a parent, or divorce or separation. So if any of these special circumstances ends up applying to you or your family, you can fill out the appeal request form and attach any supporting documentation and send it to our one-stop email, which I'll show at the end. But this is the link that you can find the appeal form on. And the appeal form for next year's students will be available early November, like next month, but it'll only be reviewed once your student is admitted. So please keep that in mind. And you must have a FAFSA on file in order for us to be able to review your appeal request. Okay, so now we have some time for questions. Let me go ahead and check out the chat box and see what we have there. So the first question is, do work study just work at SU, or do they work around the area as well? Mainly it's on campus. It's usually all the departments around campus. I believe there may be a couple locations kind of off campus that offer work study, but mainly they're all departments on campus. Can you show the Cal Grant website again? Yes. Why can't I go back? Oh, sorry, that's the wrong way. Let me go back to, I'll leave this up for now. Okay, so this question is, can you confirm SCU's Fafsa and CSS code? So the school code should be listed right here. So for the Fafsa 001326 and the SCU profile code for CSS is 4851. Ray, do you want to take a couple of the questions?
Okay, so I see one here that says, would you be able to have federal work study and get additional aid? The answer is yes. So the only rule, well, not the only rule, but one of the rules with financial aid is that a student is not allowed to receive more in financial aid awards than their total cost of attendance. And then if one of the awards is need-based, then you have to have that demonstrated need as determined by your FAFSA in order to be eligible for that award. But yes, so for example, a student can have Pell Grant eligibility and Cal Grant eligibility and be receiving both of those awards and still receive federal work study awards as well. So you can absolutely do that. And let's see. And so the question here about what types of merit aid does Santa Clara offer that's not need-based? So just when you complete your Common App and you've requested to be admitted to the university, your Common App is going to be considered for not only admission to the university, but at that time, the Office of Undergraduate Admissions is going to consider students for their merit scholarships. We have 3 primary merit scholarships, the Dean's, which is varying amounts, the President's Scholarship, which is full tuition, and then the Provost, which is half tuition. So there's more Dean's scholarships than there are Provost, and then there are fewer Presidents than there are Provost. So there's just a few of the President's Awards. These are extremely competitive, but the only thing that you need to submit in order to be considered for these merit scholarships would be the Common App. The next thing would be the CSS Profile. This is what the university uses more for the university aid, but those would mostly be need-based. But what I always tell people that are considering, anybody that's interested in getting financial aid from the university at all, even if you're thinking primarily that it would be merit and your family isn't what you would consider typically needy, or you won't be eligible for Cal Grant or Pell Grant, I would still strongly encourage you to complete the CSS profile, because the main way that we know you're interested in receiving financial aid is if you tell us. And the way that we know is because you've submitted an application. So even if you don't think that you would be eligible for aid, I don't think I've ever had anybody say, gee, I'm sorry, I filled out the CSS profile. That was a waste of time. Usually people are really glad they did and more regret that they didn't. So that's not necessarily for merit aid, but it's still an important one. Andrea, do you want to?
Okay, let's see. So I think people are asking about when they should expect to see how much they have to pay and when they'll receive their financial aid package. So if you're notified of admission, you should receive your financial aid package. I believe it's a couple days after admission. You should receive it, I believe, by mail as well as by email. And you should be able to log in. It'll tell you exactly which grants and which scholarships and what federal aid you got, as well as it should come with a cost of attendance. So that should be able to, you can take the cost of attendance minus any financial aid that you have, and that'll be how much you have to pay over the quarter. For the year. And there was a question about a tuition payment plan. So our bursar's office does offer tuition payment plans. You can see their website for more information, but just briefly, yes, you can split each quarter's payment over 3 months. You can just opt into that payment plan each quarter that you want to. So you're not automatically enrolled in that payment plan. You will have to actively enroll in it for specific quarters that you want it to be in. Let's see. Ray, do you want to answer the question about the identity fraud?
So there's a question here about identity fraud. Where is that? Where did it go? Okay, thank you. So I'm just gonna touch on a few things as I'm looking for this one. As far as deadlines go, you definitely want to take note of the page that we're on right now. Yes, you want to complete the Fafsa and the CSS profile by the deadlines, depending on whether you're applying for early action, early decision 1, or regular decision. So you definitely want to have those in, because we do process financial aid at the same time that you guys are admitted, or shortly after you guys are admitted. And then I had answered a minute ago, but I'll make this a little bit clearer. In order to apply for merit-based scholarships, all you really have to submit is the Common App. But I strongly encourage people to apply for this with the CSS profile as well. But if you don't submit anything except the Common App, you'll still be looked at for merit awards. Let's see. No, I simply cannot find that again. Can you read the question to me? Do you know what it is?
Okay, so the question was, maybe others have had this problem, but we can't connect from Fafsa to the IRS to use the DRT due to previous identity fraud. Do you have a recommendation about submitting Fafsa in a verified IRS form to SCU?
So yes, first of all, I'm sorry that happened. So using the IRS data retrieval tool while you're completing the FAFSA is not a requirement. You can complete the information on your own based on the information that you have. You know, you want to have your documents for reference. And then you don't need to do anything else unless you are contacted by us. There is a possibility that if you, when you do the FAFSA, you may be selected for a process called verification by the Department of Education. If you do get selected, you would need to provide those tax documents to our office, but that's something that you really don't want to worry about unless the situation comes up. And even then when it does, if it does come up, it's not a problem. It's just something that's more of a quality control issue than anything else. So you can definitely complete the FAFSA with stated information. Just be prepared to forward documents if you're requested to do so. Okay.
Okay, so yes, I did say, the question was, did you say a few days after submission or acceptance of college that I will know if I can receive aid or scholarship? Yes, so I think your admissions letter would say, like, please allow for 48 hours for you to receive your financial aid letter, but you should receive it shortly after you receive notice of your admission. And we did have a question about what typical GPA scores receive merit scholarships. So we do have an admissions rep here in our Zoom meeting, and she's going to help answer that question for us.
Hi, everybody. How are you doing? My name is Danielle Wenzel-Sandoval. I'm the Director of Marketing and Communication in the admission office and one of the counselors. So yeah, we get this question a lot about merit scholarships and what we're looking for. It is a combination of a variety of things, from your GPA to the types of classes you chose to take in high school, how rigorous they are. So for instance, AP classes, honors classes, IB curriculum, dual credit. We're also looking at the school you're coming from, trying to keep your education in context. So what types of classes are offered at your school? what you took advantage of, how did you challenge yourself from your first year in high school all the way till your senior year. So senior year is still important, and we're looking that you're continuing to take those rigorous classes. We're also looking at personal qualifications. So we're looking at things on the personal side, such as what you've been involved in, extracurricular wise, what are your passions, your goals, your hobbies, your interests. We're looking at your personal statement. We're looking at your letters of recommendation. So all of that said, just like the admission process, our review for merit scholarships is holistic in the sense that it's typically about our top 10 to 15% of admitted students who receive scholarships on a merit-based side. In terms of averages, what I can share with you is the average to be admitted. So historically, this past year, the average GPA to get into Santa Clara was about a 3.85 GPA. So that's the average. So that means kind of the middle 50%, right? So the top 10 to 15% of students who are admitted, those are the students who are competitive for merit scholarships. So kind of well above the middle 50% profile. One thing to note this year, we are test optional. So I want to mention that because you do not need to submit your test scores to be considered for merit-based scholarships. So you can submit them if you'd like to, but you do not need to be competitive. We will not look at test scores if you do not want us to look at your test scores. So just keep that in mind that we are test optional. Let me see if anything else came in. Oh yeah, SAT. Okay. But yeah, so just keep in mind that it is a combination of, not just GPA, but rigor and also looking at the personal qualifications for merit.
Thank you, Danielle. I think another question is the SAT considered in the merit scholarships?
Yeah, so I just said we are test optional. So we will only use the SAT in the evaluation and merit process if you submit it. And GPA is a 3.85 unweighted versus weighted. And if you're, I just saw another question pop up. If you are talking about admission, I can't quite tell if you're talking about admission or financial aid, but you'll hear back about early decision 1 and early action decisions by usually the 3rd week of December is what we say. So around that time frame, usually around Christmas time is what I say is when you'll find out. And then for financial aid, as Andrea and Ray have mentioned, usually that comes like a couple days after you receive your admission decision. I think that's it.
Okay, and we saw that there was a question about whether or not submitting the Fafsa or the CSS profile, does that affect your chances of admission? The answer is no. Admission is need blind, so it does not matter if you submit a Fafsa or a CSS profile. The people that will be admitting you into the university won't even know if you've done that or not. So it's completely does not affect your admission at all. There was another question about types of institutional aid and kind of goes along with the question we saw about whether or not there's anything that's a full ride. So I'm assuming when you say a full ride, you're talking about something that would cover your tuition and like your room and board. And we do have a scholarship called, or a program called the Johnson Scholars that can provide both tuition and also room and board costs. There's different levels of that award. So sometimes it's just tuition, or sometimes it's they're not all the same, but that is one thing that you can look at. There's information on our website about the Johnson Scholars Program. And that is one way to look at perhaps getting all of those costs covered. There's a few other programs, very few and far between, some privately offered that can provide financial aid in excess of just your tuition costs, but they're very, very few, very specialized, and usually you know exactly what they are before you're applying for those. And types of institutional aid. The most common Santa Clara aid you're going to see on your financial aid award letter is going to be SCU need-based grant, SCU incentive grant. Those are essentially the same award. One's just saying that you've demonstrated need according to your FAFSA, and with the other one, you either don't have need according to your FAFSA, or you maybe didn't submit a FAFSA. There's another one called the Jesuit Ignatian Award. This one is awarded to our students who are coming from a Jesuit high school, and that is usually need-based as well. So you would have to submit a Fafsa to receive that. There are a few other types of awards. We have a very generous group from alumni from Santa Clara who are usually donating good amounts of money to the school, and sometimes they have an endowed scholarship. So it is always possible that you might see an endowed scholarship on your award letter, but by far the two most common would be the SCU need-based grant or the SCU incentive grant, with the Jesuit Ignatian Award coming in at third place.
Okay, and there's a question that asks, when a student gets admission but doesn't have any financial aid from Fafsa or CSS, in that case, what are the options? So, I mean, to begin with, even as long as you fill out the Fafsa, at the very least, if you don't qualify for any other need-based aid, you will be offered an unsubsidized loan. But other options would include filing an appeal with us, like I discussed at the end, if there was a special circumstance, to see if you can appeal for any more need-based aid or additional federal aid. And then kind of like Ray talked about, you can always cover some of the gap with private scholarships, and then also private loans would be your other options. How likely are scholarships / financial aid given? That's a really hard question to answer that we don't really have an answer to, because it really depends year by year. Depends on the applicant pool, how much funding we have this year. There's just a lot of less predictable factors. So unfortunately, it's hard for me to give you an estimate of what each student receives.
So now we've entered the answers where the answer is going to be, it depends a little bit. There's a really great question here about how much typical debt a student gets into when they graduate from Santa Clara University and how long it would typically take before they're paid off. And I am sure that there are statistics out there that take the number of students we have versus the number of debt they accumulate. But the answer to that one is really, it depends on the student. It depends on how much need you have. It depends on, how much financial aid you get, whether or not you're willing to do federal work study. A student does not ever have to take out any loans. It's always an option. A student can take out only a very limited amount of loan funds from the federal government. So with the Fafsa, you are eligible for a total of $5,500 of federal student loans for your first year. Your second year, that increases to $6,500. Your third and fourth years, that increases to $7,500. So the maximum that an undergraduate student can borrow in those years would be that amount. You can borrow less. Your parents can borrow any amount up to the total cost of attendance. If you receiving no other financial aid, they could potentially borrow your total cost of attendance for the whole year, which, would be around $75,000 a year. So that you can get into a considerable amount of debt. The same thing with the private loan. You would get, they could borrow up to your total cost of attendance in a private loan. So you can definitely see where people can get into a little bit of debt trouble if they are taking out these private loans or utilizing the full Parent Plus loan every year. But as a student with the FAFSA, you're sort of limited on the amount that you can borrow. Repayment plans are something that you would enter into with your lender after you graduate. One good thing to remember is if you borrow a loan, you can pay it back right away and there are no prepayment penalties. So say, for example, you borrowed $3,500 your first year and then you got a terrific summer job and you made $4,500 over the summer and you said, hey, I'd like to pay off my loan. You can absolutely do that and there's no problem. So it's completely personal, depending on how you want to handle your debt, if any, for school. You can also, when you enter into your repayment programs with your lender, you can opt for things called a income-driven repayment plan, which means you can base the payments that you make on your income that you're making at the time. So there's a lot of different options, but what that essentially means is if there is an average, it's just based on numbers. Everybody's is going to be a little bit different.
Okay, so I think we have time for a couple more questions. This question is financial aid awards completely different each of the 4 years? Are any awards guaranteed for all 4 years so that the student is not forced to drop out? That's a good question. So SU grants, so this could be like your Dean Scholarship, your SU need-based grant, something like that. Those are guaranteed for 12 consecutive quarters, regardless of what your FAFSA shows. So, and that'll stay with you for your 4 years as long as you maintain satisfactory academic progress, which is a 2.0 cumulative GPA or higher. All the other types of financial aid, so your loans, maybe your Pell Grant, your FSEOG, that will depend on what your FAFSA shows each year. So you will want to fill that out each year to be eligible, to see if you are eligible for those types of aid for the next year. But the SU grants are guaranteed for 12 consecutive quarters.
Okay, and we have a question here about international students. So do international students, should they send the CSS profile? International students, there's two types of international students. There's international students who are coming to us from another country, who are citizens of another country and are coming to the United States for their college education. And those students do not receive anything other than merit scholarships from Santa Clara University and international students should not complete or submit the CSS profile. You can, of course, but it would not be considered in your financial aid award. However, there's another type of what's considered an international student, which are students who live here and would really also otherwise be known as dreamers, or students who are eligible for, like, say in California, it'd be called the California Dream Act application. Those students don't need to complete the CSS profile, but you would want to complete the California Dream Act application at the CSAC website, the same place where the Cal Grant is completed, and you would definitely be considered for that.
Okay, I think that's all the questions we have so far, and we're pretty much out of time, but I'm just gonna go ahead and if there's any other questions that you guys think of later, you can go ahead and send us an email to onestop@scu.edu, or this is our phone number if you want to reach us. But thank you for joining us, and please contact us if you have any other questions.
Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you.